Aloha and welcome to Faith in Politics. I'm Eva Andrade, and on today's show, we're going to talk about what's happening in Washington and the impeachment of President Donald Trump. We're going to talk about what's happening in California and Governor Newsom and the attempt to get him recalled out of office. And then we're going to unveil a new part of the show called The World According to Jim. And then we're going to talk about what's happening here in Hawaii's state legislature. So let's chat about that. Let the definitions begin. I have heard over and over again over the past several weeks about you Christians, you people of faith, you conservatives. And you know what the crazy part is? Some of those very people that are saying that are other faith-based people, other Christians. We could be here all day trying to figure out, dear listener, what a true Christian is. And then when all is said and done, someone out there will disagree, and then we'll be right back to someone else's definition. I think we need to remember that I cannot define you and you cannot define me. That's not our job. Our very being comes from a creator who knows us and loves us enough to make us unique, special, different, like no one else. And I'm kind of happy about that. I don't want to be you, and I definitely don't want you to be me. Jeremiah 1:5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you." That's why we are so strongly pro-life, because we believe that even before we were born, God knew us, God loved us, and we were known by this creator living God. So before we get all tangled up in the world's definition of who we are, let's remember that God has plans for us individually, plans for our welfare and not for evil, to give us a future and a hope. And that's Jeremiah 29, verses 11 through 13. This individual gift of being unique is what strengthens our world as a whole. I am one puzzle piece in a grand masterpiece. The only definition I want to be part of is the one that rests securely in Him, because He is the master glue in a world that's falling apart. And that's my thoughts for the week.
Very clever and well done.
Well, thank you very much. We are all this wonderful, unique masterpiece that the Lord put together. And I would like to welcome you to the show, Jim Hochberg, as always, my co-host.
Well, hello. And you know what? The other thing that your monologue made me think of is our discussion last week on the 1619 Project and the 1776 Commission and the completely opposite takes on who people are.
I think what's important for us to remember is that when we bring our strengths into whatever situations we have, we're going to be able to just get over all of these challenges before us. I mean, obviously we have weaknesses too, but us being people of faith, that's what keeps us motivated to do what we do, is based on all these great things.
Yes, it is.
All right, so let's talk about all of the executive orders right now that are happening. As always, it's really interesting because when you look at the number of executive orders that have been done, to date, Joe Biden has signed 25 executive orders to date. And I'm getting this information from the Federal Registry website. So they always list anytime there's any presidential actions, it's listed there. And if you're interested in looking at this, you can also see all of the presidential actions. In fact, Donald Trump in his entire presidency had signed 220 executive orders. Barack Obama had done 276 executive orders. And George W. Bush had 291 executive orders. And William Clinton, our Uncle Bill, had 254.
But what you got to realize is through the course of a 4-year term in office for a president, he is the executive branch head. So he has to communicate with his departments through orders. And guess what they're called? Executive orders. Well, and so they're not always trying to undo what the predecessor president did. They're moving forward obviously with the current president's agenda, but the ones at the beginning are the slap in the face to the people that didn't vote for him.
Well, and I think that's the important thing that we want to talk about is that even President Biden has had to make public statements because of all the attention he's getting with all these executive orders he is doing. He has done more executive orders in his time in office than President
In the number of
correct. Days, right?
That is correct.
So he did have to come out and
by
say
a huge margin.
by a huge margin, and he's made it clear in some of the statements he's made on these executive orders that he's doing it to undo Trump's bad executive orders. I mean, I'm going to quote later on something that he actually said about that.
But you got to go back to your opening, the definition of bad. You know, maybe they weren't bad. Maybe they were good because our side liked them.
Well, no, and that's a very good point to make, is that we're always going to be coming from the faith-based perspective. So we might be talking about an executive order that we don't like, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a population of the United States that likes it and is cheering it. So that's true. But just so that we're putting facts out there, other presidential things that President Biden has done is he's put out what they call other presidential documents. He's done 7 of them. Donald Trump in his entire presidency did 333. Barack Obama did 605. George Bush did 572. And Bill Clinton did 336. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm putting this out there that it's not that he's doing something that nobody else has done. He's just doing a little bit more than
at the beginning.
Because he's making a statement. And I think that even he would say that quite proudly.
Well, actually, if you remember, before he clinched the nomination for the Democratic Party in the last election for president, his people met with Bernie Sanders people, and they came up with that kind of like a contract that if he did these things, they'd back him, kind of a thing. And this looks like the points that were supposed to be covered. So he's doing what he agreed with the Bernie Sanders AOC group. So their side should like it a lot, and the people that don't agree with their position should not like it a lot.
Okay, so now there's 2 recent executive orders that he signed that I think we should just briefly talk about. And I really strongly encourage our listeners and our viewers to go to the whitehouse.gov website and to stay on top of all of these executive orders, because not only are the executive orders themselves posted, but also the president's statements or the vice president's statement on these orders. And I think that as American citizens, we should know why they're doing what they're doing. Agree or not, we should at least be educated about it. So 2 of the presidential executive orders that he did on January 28th, the first one he wanted to do is he really wanted to take care of the Affordable Care Act. He didn't like all of the things that Trump did. So what I want to do real briefly is just read when he signed the presidential order. This is what he said. He said, and this was the statement that he did at 1:43 on January 28th. He said, "Today I'm about to sign 2 executive orders that are," and then basically the best way to describe them, to undo the damage Trump has done. There's nothing new that we're doing here other than restoring the Affordable Care Act and restoring the Medicaid to the way it was before Trump became president, which by fiat he changed, made more inaccessible, more expensive, and more difficult for people to qualify for either of these 2 items, the Affordable Care Act or Medicaid. And the second one, which I want to talk about briefly too, the second order I'm going to be signing also changes what the president has done. The president, and I'm reading what the former president has done, and a memorandum reversed my predecessor's attack on women's health, health access. And we continue to battle COVID-19. It's even more critical that Americans have meaningful access to health care. Now, I know that sounded weird, but I'm reading the statements as they're printed. So that's even
so
the
that
cough.
Sounds like a transcript, not a statement.
It's posted on the website.
Okay,
as
so that's
a
statement. Transcript. That's kind of sad.
Okay, but that's what's there.
Okay.
So I'd like to get your thoughts on the Affordable Care Act.
Okay, so the problem that we have that kind of covers everything we could ever talk about these days that has to do with government politics is there are 2 totally separate universes of what the facts might be, even though there's really only one set of facts. And the people that supported the Affordable Care Act at the beginning had a story to tell that wasn't really true from what came out later, and he's just pushing the same theory, the same point of view, because it wasn't just President Trump that changed the Affordable Care Act. Courts did, which means judges and lawyers had arguments over points and decisions were made. He doesn't address any of that, but it's really important because if we remember, the Supreme Court said that the required payment was a tax, which upset a lot of people because it wasn't put together that way. So the mandates and all these things that weren't dealt with by the president weren't addressed, and getting rid of the mandate was a big deal. The other thing that the people that support single-payer healthcare never really want to talk about is the difference between having access to insurance to pay for healthcare, which is what they're always arguing about, and having actual access to the healthcare itself. Because really what saves your life is having access to a doctor, which everybody has, even illegal immigrants in emergency rooms. What they're really trying to do is get everybody on insurance because somebody has to pay for the insurance, and the payer of the insurance, like the Little Sisters of the Poor and Hobby Lobby, don't want to have to pay for mandated coverage that they don't want. That's the social fight going on.
Well, I think, and that's what a lot of people of faith are struggling with right now, because they have, in America, there are very strong opinions on the Affordable Care Act. I mean, depending on who you're talking to, right, you're going to really...
So my personal insurance doubled.
Well, I was going to say that here in Hawaii, we had a Quest program that was really, really good back before the Health Care Act. And I think that Hawaii legislators did a really good job of the way that Quest worked back then. And I've heard many people say that once we moved into this new Affordable Care Act, things did not work as well as they did before. So I don't know. I think that there's very strong opinions on this. So you might have some Christians, I guess, that might support what President Biden has done with reversing the executive order that Trump did. But I think the second executive order is where they get upset, because now we're going to be paying for abortions, not only here in the United States, but we're going to be paying for foreign abortions. And people have very strong religious opinions about that. And so people might be, on one hand, applauding what he's done, but on the other hand, they're really, really upset about what he's done. So what are your thoughts about that?
Okay, so the abortion issue and who pays for it is a very split opinion across the country, no doubt about it. But I wish the press would ask him, why is it that you're trying to fund insurance companies? Do they contribute to your campaign? I mean, why are you so much into making sure everybody has health insurance instead of health care?
So what do you say to people who are upset about one and happy about the other, or upset about both or happy about both? What do you say to those people?
Well, I think the main thing is that we exercise critical thinking at all times. And so just being happy because he's a Democrat and he wants affordable health care, that's not good enough. You have to critically consider why.
Okay. Well, I think that that's really important. And again, because what do we talk about every time, right? We're always encouraging people to stay plugged in, stay educated. Don't just listen to the news, because the news may be steering you a long way.
Go to the original source on everything.
Absolutely.
Opinions are worthless.
Great. Okay. So what we're going to do when we, after we come back from break, we are going to be talking about what's happening in California and the attempt to recall Governor Newsom. But we're also going to talk briefly about the impeachment and what's happening. So we'll see you back.
We have a mission here at Kalo TV. We continue to be the only local Christ-centered media outlet in Hawaii. God has planted this station to nourish believers and to harvest souls for eternity. It's a calling we hold dear, and today we need your help. Partner with us as we continue to create original local programs.
We're so very grateful for that whole journey.
Walking down to our story room.
Oh my God.
Showcase solid biblical teaching.
We reach more people in one day with the broadcast of the gospel.
It's music to God's ears.
Improve our infrastructure and influence social media. Are you willing to labor with us for Hawaii, for your ohana, for the next generation? Go to kalotv.com and partner with us today.
Aloha, I'm Eva Andrade. I'm the president of Hawaii Family Forum, and we've been serving Hawaii's faith-based community since 1998. What we do is we provide research and education to the faith-based community to help them understand what's happening at the state capitol and what's happening on the issues that affect the families here in Hawaii. If you would like more information, please visit us on the web. But in the meantime, know that Micah 6:8 says that the Lord requires of us to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And we can help you do that, not only to raise your voice the way that the Lord calls us to raise our voice, but to understand the issues on a scriptural basis. And we'll tell you how you can learn more about what's affecting Hawaii's families. Mahalo. Welcome back. Okay, so another thing that everyone's talking about right now is the impeachment, the second impeachment. And President Donald Trump is the only president to ever go through impeachment twice, right?
He's also the only president to have a porn star accuse him of things that went nowhere. He's the only president to have the FBI investigating his campaign surreptitiously. He's also the only, come on.
Well, and is this a precedent that's now been set? I mean, now because of this, everyone who runs for president, should they now be worried that this is going to happen?
I suppose when the House of Representatives is controlled by the other political party, sure. Why not?
Okay. Well, I think that, you know what? It's like every day is more and more interesting to people that are paying attention. One way or another, it's crazy things are happening. And I never thought that, when I go shopping and I see everybody in masks, I never thought in my lifetime that I would ever see everybody wearing masks anytime they're out in public. I mean, after a year, I'm still getting used to that.
I don't wear one unless I have to.
Okay. Well, we've got you on record for that. Okay. So let's talk about the impeachment. So the vote in the House was 232 to 197. Okay. All Democrats voted and 10 Republicans. Okay. And of course, we're hearing about the Republicans there were a small group of Republicans that tried to get Liz Cheney booted out of her position of leadership because she voted for Trump's impeachment. And what happened this week is that didn't happen. But interestingly enough.
Well, what happened this week is she retained her position as the third in line in the Republicans of the House.
She did. She retained her position. But the Republicans are also circling the wagons around a representative who has been attacked relentlessly by the media because of some things she's had on her social media. You got any thoughts about that?
You mean the lady in Georgia?
Yes.
There's something that the Constitution gives us, which is the right to free speech and freedom of association. So we're supposed to be able to gather together with like-minded people, and we're supposed to be able to talk about what we want. The reason that the founders put that in the Constitution is because that's required for us to have the freedom to think what we want to think, which is part of being a human being. It's like one of those natural rights. And so we are moving so quickly away from the foundation that we all think is just automatic. We're losing our foundation very, very quickly. When somebody in Congress can be attacked like that. I mean, in China, they attack professors and college students who have contrary views toward the government. In America, we're actually doing the same thing to elected officials. It's people don't realize how far away that brings us from the founding of this country.
Okay, well let's talk about we're talking about two things. So first of all, let's remind people that once someone's elected and they're in office, we still have a responsibility to hold them accountable. We should still be paying attention to the way they're voting on issues. Do they listen to us as constituents? So the people in Georgia, if they don't like the way that their representative is talking or things that she or he has on their social media, they have a right as constituents to bring this to her attention or to hold her accountable. In fact, we encourage people to do that, don't we?
And the House of Representatives runs for re-election every 2 years. So the whole idea was the members of the House would be very responsive to their voters because they got to get reelected every 2 years.
And that's the important thing, is that if you don't like your person,
don't vote for
then
him.
don't vote for
But
him.
we do that here.
I know.
I don't get it.
Jim, we could do a whole show on how you feel about how the people in Hawaii vote or don't vote or whatever. But okay, so that's that issue. So going back to the impeachment, though. All right, so Trump is the only president to ever be impeached twice. What are the consequences of a second impeachment? Now, what people are saying is that he's probably not going to ultimately be found guilty of this. So why do this? What would be the purpose of doing this?
So I looked at the trial memorandum that the House of Representatives, the Democrats, submitted to the Senate. And basically, they are arguing that even though he's no longer in office at the time of the trial to determine guilt or not guilty on the impeachment charge, because impeachment is a charge of wrongdoing. Even though he's no longer in office, the Democrats are arguing that he can still be convicted. And if he's convicted, he can't be removed because he's already gone. But then there's a part of the 14th Amendment that says if you've been impeached from office, you can't run for office or hold an office of public trust again in the country. And we have to remember, any person that is appointed to the federal government, not that's employed, but that's appointed, can be impeached. That's federal judges. Anybody that gets advice and consent of the Senate, nominated by the president, advice and consent. All the department heads that run the agencies in the executive branch, federal judges, all of those guys get impeached. That's how they get removed if they don't get just fired and they willingly leave. It's also the president, the vice president. It's also interesting that only the president and the vice president out of all those people that I mentioned are elected. So to me, the question comes up, can a person that's not in office be prohibited from running again because he was impeached and convicted when all of the examples the Democrats use in their trial memo are of non-elected people that were holders of federal appointments that got convicted after they left office? So it's very complicated. It's an 80-page trial brief. It's available online if people want to read it. The president filed a 20-page answer basically saying you're wrong. Once he's left office, you can't remove him. And it's a conjunctive removal and prohibition to run again. And since you can't remove him, you don't get the other penalty either.
Well,
so I don't know. It's very complicated.
It is complicated. And what's really interesting is if you watch all of these talking heads, regardless of whether they're conservative or liberal, nobody agrees whether it can or cannot happen. You'll have one constitutional lawyer say it absolutely can. You can impeach someone who's not in office. And then you have another constitutional professor that says you absolutely cannot. So are we going to ever know if you can or cannot? Or is this process saying that you can, as far as law goes?
It depends on, so this is not a legal proceeding. It's a political proceeding.
But it's something that's going to set in motion for future presidents and for future action.
Well, okay, so if I was a historian in 100 years and I was looking at this because the issue came up again, like right now they're looking at Nixon, they're looking at Clinton and the older ones. So I would be looking at this and I would be noticing, wow, they started talking about impeachment before he ever got elected in 2016. Look at what they did. I mean, they were after this guy forever. So that kind of tarnishes the whole impeachment process the first time and the second time with an air of politics that, to me, is very distasteful. You're supposed to exercise impeachment for the benefit of the country because somebody's done something, high crimes and misdemeanors, treason. They're talking about insurrection, but they're not referring to it under the treason language. They're talking about it under the high crimes and misdemeanors, under the misdemeanors language. There's just a bunch of dishonesty in it to me. When you, again, exercise critical thinking, look around the edges. Don't just take the words for granted. So I think in the future, it's going to be very easy for somebody being subject to a penalty of impeachment because of this to point out how very different their situation is, because this is the oddest, most horror movie type political thing I've ever seen.
Okay. Well, I want to get into what's happening in California. So as far as the impeachment goes, we know that the trial is going to start. They've given them some time, both sides, to come up with their stuff. And so in future shows, we'll be getting more into that. And maybe next week we'll talk about the idea of censure, because that's also been thrown out there. But let's move to California, because we only have a few minutes left, and I want to talk about that. Okay. So
And I want to talk about what we don't have in Hawaii. So
yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So 19 states have this ability to remove somebody who's elected in office by recall. And so that's what's happening.
Do people know what recall is?
Well, we'll get to that. I want to build the stage first. Okay, so the people in California have been very unhappy with their governor. And to date, they have raised over 1 million signatures to get him recalled from office. I believe they need about 1,500,000 to get him to get that on the ballot. And then what would happen is then people could put their name in to run. And my understanding is that's what happened.
With Schwarzenegger?
So it's saying that in 2003, Governor Gray was recalled by 55% of voters. More than 100 people ran to replace him. And then that, of course, that distributed all the votes. And so the winner with 48.6 was Arnold Schwarzenegger.
But that's a big percentage.
It's a big percentage. So there is a precedence for this happening. But let's talk about this. So what is recall, and how does that? I mean, people in Hawaii, if they get mad at the governor, I mean, what's our redress here?
Okay, so what happens is when a territory wants to become a state, they have to create a constitution that Congress approves. We did that in 1959. When California did it in the 18 whatever it was, they had provisions to recall, which is like unelect. We voted for this guy. He's the governor. We don't like what he's doing. If we can get enough signatures on a petition to get the question put on the ballot, can we recall him and pick somebody else? Because it happens at the same time. They have the power to do that. We don't have that power on the statewide offices and the legislative offices. We do have it in the city and county of Honolulu for the mayor and the city council, but we don't have it for the governor and the legislators in the state legislature. You want to chat a little bit about the rights we do have in the state constitution?
I think that if you can take maybe about 30 seconds or so and tell us how do we make it happen
So
here?
In 1959, what the legislature came up with in the territory to become the state of Hawaii was, we'll give every 10 years on the 8th year of the decade a question on the ballot, should we have a constitutional convention? And if that question passes the voting measure for ballot measure, then a constitutional convention gets set up. And at that point, we could change the Constitution to add recall, referendum, the things that we don't have that most states do have, because I think those other states trust their voters more than Hawaii government trusts our intelligence. But that's what would be required. And the last time we had a constitutional convention was 1978.
Yeah, and every time it comes up on the ballot, as you know, I mean, there are not a lot of people that vote to have one.
Well, guess this. In 1978, we created OHA, Office of Hawaiian Affairs. We gave the public unions collective bargaining rights in the Constitution. So the Constitution of the state of Hawaii actually says we have a constitutional right to unionize, which isn't in any other state constitution. Those two rights that came up in 1978 are being protected mightily every 8th year of the decade when the question comes up.
Now, there is another way to make it happen. I mean, a legislator could put a constitutional question as a bill, and then that could pass, and then that would also put it on the ballot.
The legislature could also pass their own term limits.
Okay.
They can also, they're not going to hurt themselves. You got to be kidding me.
Well, and just to put it out there, I think that this legislative session, a couple legislators have put out bills.
Yeah, a maximum of 16 years of office. Wow.
Yes. Okay. Well, what we're going to do when we come back from the break is we are going to give Jim Hochberg the opportunity to let us know what's happening in that brain of his. So this is The World According to Jim. We'll see you in a minute.
We have a mission here at Kalo TV. We continue to be the only local Christ-centered media outlet in Hawaii. God has planted this station to nourish believers and to harvest souls for eternity. It's a calling we hold dear, and today we need your help. Partner with us as we continue to create original local programs.
We're so very grateful for that whole journey.
Walking down to our story room.
Oh my gosh.
Showcase solid biblical teaching.
We reach more people in one day with the broadcast of the gospel.
It's music to God's ears.
Improve our infrastructure, and influence social media. Are you willing to labor with us for Hawaii, for your ohana, for the next generation? Go to kalotv.com and partner with us today.
Aloha, I'm Eva Andrade. I'm the president of Hawaii Family Forum, and we've been serving Hawaii's faith-based community since 1998. What we do is we provide research and education to the faith-based community to help them understand what's happening at the state capitol and what's happening on the issues that affect the families here in Hawaii. If you would like more information, please visit us on the web. But in the meantime, know that Micah 6:8 says that the Lord requires of us to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And we can help you do that, not only to raise your voice the way that the Lord calls us to raise our voice, but to understand the issues on a scriptural basis. And we'll tell you how you can learn more about what's affecting Hawaii's families. Mahalo.
Hey, welcome back. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what this country is actually doing these days, because it's very different than when I was a kid. Things have changed a lot.
You mean what the country's doing right now? Things like fighting, watching each other's posts on Facebook, attacking people?
I'm talking about, we've been trained since I was a kid that we need to rely on the court system to solve our political problems. And that's not really the purpose behind the Constitution. The court was supposed to be the weakest branch of government. The court was supposed to only deal with actual cases and controversies, which meant the parties in the case had to really have a dispute. Unlike in Roe v. Wade, which it wasn't really it was a planned case, right? Like the sodomy case in Texas, it was a planned case. And we've been trained to say, well, the court will answer the political question. And no, we're supposed to be voting, and we're supposed to pay attention to the candidates that we're considering to vote for. And we're supposed to actually pick people that support our values. And we don't do that anymore. And that goes back to the critical thinking. But it also goes back to the change that's happening in the philosophy of our government. So what I want to really talk about is the separation of church and state thing.
Okay. And that's actually good because we've had some comments on our show about the separation of church and state. Actually, and this is the comment that would tell us that we shouldn't be getting involved. And
that's because we're believers, because we don't pastor churches, we don't own churches, we don't we're not the church. So the phrase separation of church and state, I think for people like Mitch Kale, refer to the organized religious bodies, not to separate human beings. So for us to be here talking about religion and politics, faith and politics, has nothing to do with the Constitution.
But doesn't it make people nervous, right?
Well, that's what I want to talk about it for, because it shouldn't. So we have this new thinking that the separation of church and state means that the church has to be very careful not to intervene in government and politics, or they're breaching that separation. And what we need to do, what we have to know, we got to have facts. We can't just throw out information that we heard somewhere. We read it on the internet. We saw it in a video. So in 1954, Lyndon Baines Johnson was a senator in Texas running for re-election. He hadn't been president yet. He was vice president with Kennedy in 1960. And then he became president when Kennedy was assassinated. So almost a decade before he became president, he was having trouble in his re-election because of nonprofits, not churches, but social service nonprofits that were tax exempt under 501c3. So the Johnson Amendment, named after him because he pushed it through Congress, is where we get this 501c3 qualified charities cannot interfere in electioneering, which is the election of candidates for office. And whether or not that is constitutional according to the Supreme Court has never been asked. It's never had a case up there. And we hear that as unconstitutional, which it probably is. But the court did set up in 1947 the theory that the separation of church and state meant that the church couldn't be active in politics and government. But that was a misstatement of the original source of the analogy of a wall of separation of church and state,
which came from
Thomas Jefferson's letter in 1801 to the Danbury, Connecticut Baptist. So what you got to know is what the story was at that time.
Yeah, so just so that the regular people out there, and I know you're going to address this, is that the Danbury Baptists actually asked him to qualify something. So it wasn't the other way around.
So 1801 was only a couple of years after 1797 or 1789 when the Bill of Rights was adopted by the Continental Congress. So the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion nor inhibiting the free exercise thereof, have been around for 10 years on the federal level, because the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in the Constitution only became applicable to the states in this country through the 14th Amendment after the Civil War. People don't know that. Before the Civil War, there was a big difference between what the federal government did to people in their neighborhoods and what the state governments did to people in their neighborhoods. So back when the First Amendment was new, the states, which had been around as colonies and been around as settlements before that, had local government. They had churches. They had rules between what churches could do in the government and whatever have you. And as a matter of fact, the Revolutionary War was made possible because of the Black Robe Regiment was essentially military leaders that worked in churches as pastors and preachers, took off their black church pastor robes and had military uniforms on under them. We've all seen the paintings of that.
Right.
So until Thomas Jefferson got elected, there had been questions because all of the states had favored religions. Why do you think Maryland is called Maryland? Because they were Catholics. Mary, right? Okay, so the Connecticut, the Baptists were not the preferred state religion. It was a Congregationalist. Like most of New England, we know Henry Opukahaia came from the Congregationalist Church, right? So the Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut wrote a letter to the president. It was kind of a political discussion. It wasn't a legal discussion. It was a political. He got support from the Danbury Baptists because he was an anti-federalist and they were anti-federalists. And they wrote to him saying, what is this First Amendment? Are we going to still be able to be a minority religion in Connecticut? Or is the First Amendment, now the federal government going to muzzle us? And he wrote back and he said, no, actually, the government can't get in between a person's faith and their relationship with God. In fact, the First Amendment erects a wall of separation between church and state, protecting the church from the government.
Wait, that's not the Constitution, Jim.
So what has me upset is that we don't exercise critical thinking and we just believe what people with the loudest voices can tell us. And that's really becoming a problem with social media and the big tech companies because they're keeping us from being able to share information they don't want people to know.
Well, and I think that that's what's happening. You started this segment saying, what are we doing right now, right? What is this country doing? And one of the big things the country's doing right now is they're regurgitating the same falsities over and over and over again. This is one of them. This is a big one.
It's a huge one because it completely and the thing that doesn't get talked about is in the last 5 years, the U.S. Supreme Court 9-0 ruled that it is not a violation of the Establishment Clause for a church to submit an application for a grant to get a government-funded torn up rubber tire playground surface like anybody else that could apply for the grant.
Well, and even more current than that, there were religious institutions having issues getting some of the government funding for this pandemic because of this idea of the separation of church and state. So even currently, that is still a misconception that is causing great distress to people of faith.
And the thing that goes back to the beginning of my segment, if we don't vote for people that understand Thomas Jefferson's approach to the federal government, we are not going to have the government that they intended us to have. We're losing it.
I know, but Jim, we keep doing this dance, and so you and I are very familiar with this, and it's one of your pet peeves but we keep coming back to this. If we don't have good people running for office, then we can't put a good person in that office. So there's a vicious circle happening here. We need people that have high integrity, people that are virtuous, people that have good character, good moral character, that are good, that don't have all of this crazy stuff in their past. And we've said in the past before that people today that post everything on their Facebook pages and their Twitter pages and all of these pages, they need to be very careful what they're posting because things can be used against them now.
Yeah, but still, when somebody's going to run for office, and I actually do this because of Hawaii Family Advocates that I'm the president of, we're an electioneering C4, and we're allowed to get involved in elections of people. I interview the candidates on the phone, and of course, because we can afford to do it, we buy a private investigative report about the candidate before the interview. Everybody can't afford to do that. Okay. But even without it, call them up and ask them, what do you understand the role of government is?
Well, and Hawaii Family Forum as a 501c3, we cannot do anything that you just said. But what we do provide is a voter guide that basically asks the candidates how they would vote on certain issues.
That's an interview. You do an interview through that, but it's in writing. And the ones that you really want to get out of office, you want to kick them out, those, they don't even answer.
Well, yeah, and that's my point. My point is that we always provide, not only do we make the voter guide interactive, so that people can click to go to the website of these candidates so they can read their platforms and all of this. And I think that the other thing that we do is provide the phone number because of what you just said.
People should actually call and ask them the questions that they didn't answer.
They should.
And don't just let them give a glib soundbite answer. Think about the issue because they're all issues that we're interested in. That's why you pick them.
Yeah.
And think about the issue and think about how you're going to actually treat them like your 14-year-old son that's lying to you. You drill in and you get the truth, right? Well, you need to do that to these candidates.
And then we need them to follow up. So if you don't have a good candidate that's running for office and the person that gets elected is not the person you voted for, you still have a responsibility to find out from them how they're voting on issues. We strongly encourage people to go to hawaiifamilyforum.org and sign up to get our legislative alert so they can know what issues are happening at the Capitol and how they can plug in. But the important thing is to stay plugged in. Even if there's a bill that's moving through the legislature that is a problem bill, or if it's a good bill that we're tracking, people should make that phone call to their legislator, even if it's a quick one that basically says, thank you for voting this way, or please do not pass this bill. It's so important that legislators and our congressional leaders hear from the constituents.
So let me put it this way. If you don't wash your car and you don't take care of your car, it's going to get broken down, rusted out, and you're going to have to get a new car. Well, that's your responsibility because you own that car. Well, you know what? The government, you own the government. The government is not separate from us. Remember what Abraham Lincoln said? A government for the people, by the people, and of the people. It's not, our elected people don't rule over us as subjects. They govern us because we consent to the being governed. The consent of the governed means we own the government. We got to take care of it. We got to work it through.
Okay, well, as we're winding down on this segment, Jim, and this was the world according to Jim. These are your thoughts that are bumping around in your head. I would say that most of our listeners and viewers are saying the government is broken, though, Jim. The government is broken.
And my answer is because we keep voting for the wrong people.
So in the last 30 seconds or so, tell people why they should stay plugged in if the government is so broken.
Because the government is broken because we're not doing our job. It will stay broken if we don't do our job. Our job is to make them responsive to us when they're elected, when they're running, and when they're having hearings and all that kind of stuff. You own that process. Don't abandon it.
Well, I think that we need to encourage people not to get so bombarded with the fact that the government is broken and no. So when we come back, we're going to talk about what's happening here in the state. We'll see you in a minute.
We have a mission here at Calo TV. We continue to be the only local Christ-centered media outlet in Hawaii. God has planted this station to nourish believers and to harvest souls for eternity. It's a calling we hold dear, and today we need your help. Partner with us as we continue to create original local programs.
We're so very grateful for that whole journey.
Walking down to our story room.
Oh my God.
Showcase solid biblical teaching.
We reach more people in one day with the broadcast of the gospel.
It's music to God's ears.
Improve our infrastructure and influence social media. Are you willing to labor with us for Hawaii, for your ohana, for the next generation? Go to calotv.com and partner with us today.
Welcome back. Jim, as we move into what's happening here in the legislative session, you and I go back and forth on bills as they pop for hearing. And you and I had a good chuckle last week on a bill that actually popped for hearing. I don't remember the bill number, but it was a bill that's asking the Department of Education in Hawaii to what was it? Do you remember?
Well, that was a constitutional amendment.
Yes.
One of our legislators finally read the Constitution. Imagine that. And he noticed, there's no standard to instruct the Department of Education to be excellent and efficient or something like that. And so he wants us to amend the Constitution to add to the paragraph about the Department of Education that they have to be whatever. I forget the words, excellent and efficient. And what cracked me up is that's admitting that except for the one that he wants to add that to, that shouldn't be a standard for the rest of the state government. It cracked me up.
No, and we continued laughing when the bill came up that said that questions for a constitutional amendment need to be clear and concise. And you and I cracked up about that too because
that is the law.
We're laughing because and we mentioned this in the show before, that these questions that are put out to people to amend the Constitution are so convoluted that a normal person has no idea.
Quote it.
No,
Shall the legislature have the power to reserve marriage to opposite sex
Jim, they're like,
couple?
God, he's bringing that up again. It's all they ever talk about, those people.
That is the weirdest way to ask, do you want same-sex marriage?
Well, I know, and I hear you, but the point is that isn't the only question that people get when they get their ballots. I mean, you had to do a whole show with me on explaining these questions to people on what it actually meant.
Well, we actually have a show where I said, regardless of the issue at hand, use these 5 rules when you're given a charter or an amendment for the Constitution. And if the answer to one of those is no, you're voting no.
Yep. Well, I want to, there are a couple of good bills that were introduced that aren't being heard right now, but it has to do with elections. We had a senator that put in a bill. This particular senator has a big issue with the gut and replace that Hawaii has, which means that a bill could move through both the House and the Senate, and be one way, and then it goes into conference committee and they just gut the whole thing and they turn it into a whole nother bill. And the thing about conference committee is when a bill in Hawaii moves past passing both the House and the Senate, and if there's any disagreement, it goes into conference committee.
Which is a committee that has a couple of guys from the House
and you have
a couple
to vote,
of guys
yes.
from the Senate.
Yes.
And they decide what the final language is going to be. So when they're deciding the final language of a bill they've already passed and they completely gut it and change it into a completely different bill, that's gut and replace.
And the problem with that is there's no more public input when things are in conference committee.
We can watch.
We can watch. And you and I have participated in these conference committee hearings, and we're always blown away that this is basically how it goes. You get a hearing notice, and you go conference committee meeting on the bill, and then we show up at 9 o'clock. So we'll show up at 9 o'clock, and then what will happen is they'll go, okay, well, chair recommends that there's some changes made. There's no bill that we're looking at, right? We're going to make some changes. They might tell you what the changes are going to be. They might say they're still working on it. Then they'll take a recess, and then they'll put that same bill onto tomorrow's hearing notice for the conference committee. Right. So you could come back 5 times
Absolutely.
And not have a bill in your hand that you can actually talk about. I remember that Representative Bob McDermott went off on this very process 2 sessions ago because this happened, and he was asked to vote on a bill that was not in front of him.
That he hadn't seen.
And he just was really angry about this. And the chair of the committee said, well, we just told you what we're going to do to change it. And that really bothered him. But this...
And it should.
And yeah, so the purpose of this segment is we want people to understand that this is kind of the way that Hawaii does business when a bill is moving through the normal process. But now we have this pandemic, this lockdown. The Hawaii State Legislature has decided they're going to stay closed.
But they're going to work. They're just not
they're
open
working.
for us.
They're just not open to the public. And I can't tell you how much email and phone calls and just passing in the street comments I've got from people that say that it is so depressing to drive by Hawaii State Capitol and see those boards up in front of it because it is the people's house. We understand that there's safety issues.
That's not a safety issue.
Well,
they're
no.
cleaning the koi pond.
Well,
no, I'm serious.
Okay, but but when you have a lockdown the way it is right now, it sends a bigger message, even if that's not what it is. It's not a welcoming place by any means. But what we wanted to talk about is just the way that Hawaii is doing business right now during this lockdown. So you've got rules that the House and the Senate have come up with on how you can participate in the process. And you have taken issue with some of the stuff that they put out there. So I'd like to give you a chance to share your thoughts on why you're so bothered by this process.
Okay, so I'm a citizen. I have a constitutional right to petition my government for redress of grievances. That's fancy 18th century words for go to the people that we've elected and talk to them about my opinion on policy, bills, whatever. That's the legislative process. That's why they put it in writing in the form of a bill. We get to read it. We get to submit testimony in opposition or in support or suggesting changes. They have to have a hearing that we get to show up and talk about it. It's supposed to be meaningful. It's not supposed to be kabuki play. And this year, and as if all of our friends that have joined us down there over the last 10 years have increasingly seen us getting squeezed out, you have 2 minutes for your oral presentation.
And they have a clock. They have a clock there.
And then later in the same hearing, when they're getting tired of being there, the legislative committee chairman will say, okay, if you're just going to stand on your testimony that you submitted in writing, why don't you not come up and give an oral presentation? And people, as sheep, go, okay. And I'm always sitting there thinking, no, I have a constitutional right to petition my government for redress of grievances.
I have seen you in action.
You're going to hear me.
I have seen Jim Hochberg in action, and he does have no problem going up.
This year, what their rules are blew my mind. So our constitutional rights now are to submit something in writing through the internet. And if we want to have an opportunity to participate in a Zoom presentation, we have to ask. And in the Senate, they have my written testimony and my request, and then they get to decide if I'm included in the public presentations or not. So based on the position that I'm taking, they can say no. That is depriving me of my right to petition the government for the redress of grievances.
Okay, so to be fair, so the way, and I've participated in a couple of these online trainings, not really trainings, but they're talking about the new process, right? And there are leadership in the House and Senate that believe that more people can participate now because, as we know, parking at the Capitol is horrendous.
Okay, so I got to interrupt you because it's a lie. More
no,
people,
I do not
more
lie.
people cannot participate when they, this year, created hard start and hard stop times.
Oh.
They're supposed to stay there. Okay, so we had a same-sex marriage thing in 2013. It was downstairs in the auditorium. There were hundreds of people there. It was taking all night long. That is their job.
Well, yeah, and if we're going to talk about that, well, first of all, you're calling a lie to something that they put out there saying that they believe more people can participate now because
it's an opinion.
Okay, it's an opinion. Thank you, but I mean, let me give it though. Let's give them their share to be fair. So what they're saying is that there are people who have never participated before because they don't drive down to the Capitol. They're not going to find parking, but now anybody can. Anybody, even people on the mainland
So
now
it's
that
not
have
more
an issue.
people, it's new people.
Well,
it's fewer people because they've cut short the time period that they're willing to participate.
Okay. Yes, you're right. But I mean, but let me finish my thoughts. Yes, let me do this, Jim. Okay, so going back to what you said though about the auditorium on the issue of same-sex marriage, we did petitions. Hawaii Family Forum did, and we collected thousands upon thousands upon thousands of signatures, and we delivered them in boxes. And we later on saw those boxes in the auditorium under the stage. And we had asked the Sergeant of Arms, well, what's up with those petitions? And basically here in Hawaii, that's a big thing. People say, why don't we do a petition?
Doesn't matter.
It won't matter. We did petitions against physician-assisted suicide. And what we were told is it's not that, and I talked to legislators.
And by the way, petitioning your government for redress of grievances doesn't mean a petition on a piece of paper.
I know.
It means talking about it.
Thank you. Thank you. But I want to throw out this idea of petitions because we get this all the time. Why can't we just do a petition? Legislators who don't always agree with us on things, I've worked very hard to build relationships even with them. And what they say is that in order for the petitions to mean anything for them, they would prefer that it be constituents. And real constituents. So they don't want Mickey Mouse, they don't want auntie's uncle's friend that you put on that petition that you never talked to. So Hawaii Family Forum uses a system called Voter Voice. And we encourage people to sign up to get our alerts so that you know what's happening. You cannot use Voter Voice unless you have a legal address here in the state of Hawaii. Actually, you could have a legal address anywhere, but we send out alerts to people in Hawaii. So we want to make sure that you plug in to hawaiifamilyforum.org.
And I would say, yes, do it right away.
Do it right away as we move through legislative session. We also want to let everybody know that Jim and I are doing our Dog and Pony Show, our Community Action Network training at Pearl Harbor, Calvary Chapel, Pearl Harbor on January 28th at 1:30. It's open to the public. If you'd like to see us in person, let us know you watch the show. That would be great.
And we'll be talking about the legislative session.
And we'll be talking about the legislative session and bills that are actually moving in the Capitol. We're going to be talking about that. And the other thing that we want to do is, as always, we want to thank Kalo TV for their continued partnership to make this show happen. And if you want to know more information about Kalo TV, visit them at kalotv.org. And of course, as always, we love .com. Sorry, I must have said the wrong address. The voices in my head are speaking to me. kalotv.com. Make sure that you go and find out more about Kalo TV. And as always, we want to give a big shout out to Jake O'Neill at K-Light Radio for the beautiful use of his studio, but also because of the good work that K-Light Radio does. So next week, we're going to talk more about what's happening across the nation and in the state of Hawaii. So we want to make sure that you stay plugged in as always. And as always, we want to thank Jim Hochberg for his legal advice on these issues. And we look forward to seeing you once again next week.
Aloha.
Mahalo.